Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The first thing you learn about electricity, if you learn it the hard way like I did, is that it does not care about your plans. It does not care that the roads are jammed, that the radio has turned into a loop of clipped government statements and dead air, that the neighborhood has gone quiet in a way that makes your ears ring. It does not care that you are hungry or exhausted or scared. It does not care that you are trying to build a life out of the wreckage of a week that never should have happened. Electricity is honest. It is either present or it is not. And when it is present, it will take whatever path it can take, including straight through you, without hesitation and without regret. That honesty is why I went looking for a substation. Not a big transmission yard with towers and giant steel frames you can see from miles away. Not the kind that feeds half a city. I needed a small distribution substation, one that took medium voltage power from a line overhead and stepped it down to the lower voltages that neighborhoods and small businesses use. The kind tucked behind trees between a warehouse and a creek, hidden in plain sight behind chain-link fencing and warning signs that most people ignore until they have a reason not to. I had reasons. My name is Caleb Hart. I was a maintenance electrician and controls technician before everything fell apart. Industrial plants, packaging lines, water treatment equipment, the boring backbone stuff that keeps a region running while everyone forgets it exists. I lived in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, just outside the places people recognize. I worked jobs where a power problem could mean a burnt motor, a failed contactor, a tripped breaker, or an operator who swore they didn't touch anything while standing on the emergency stop button. When the outbreak started, I had one advantage. I understood systems, not just electrical systems, systems in general, how they fail, how people behave when a system fails, how quickly the rules turn into suggestions and then into memories. I also had one big weakness. I kept thinking I could outsmart the situation with the right setup. For the first 3 days, I stayed in my row house and watched the world unthread outside my windows. The first day was confusion. Sirens, helicopters, text alerts that came late and said little. The second day was panic. People driving like the law didn't exist. People running like they were late for a fire. The third day was absence. The streets didn't fill back up. The few people I saw moving weren't moving like they were going somewhere. They wandered, staggered, stopped and stared at nothing, then jerked into motion again when some sound or light caught them. I avoided calling them what everyone called them online in those early hours. Not because I thought the word was cursed, but because words have weight, and I didn't want that weight in my head. I called them the infected, because that's what made the most sense. Something biological, something fast, something wrong with the way they moved and the way they reacted. And because infected sounded like a problem that still belonged to hospitals and labs, places with lights on and people in scrubs, places that had already gone dark. By the end of day 3, my house felt like a box. The power had gone out twice for about an hour each time, and came back in a way that made my refrigerator click and groan like it was waking up from a nightmare. The water pressure dropped. Cell service became a rotating lottery. My battery packs and radio and headlamp were suddenly more valuable than my furniture. On day 4, I heard a transformer somewhere down the block fail. You don't forget that sound if you've ever been near one when it goes. A sharp crack, a rising buzz, a heavy thump like someone dropped a refrigerator off a truck. A flash that lit up the trees for half a second. Then darkness, deeper than it should have been because the streetlights stayed off and so did the porch lights and so did the glowing little rectangles in people's windows. That's when I made the decision. If the grid was dying, I needed to get ahead of it. A generator would help, sure, but fuel was going to be the new currency, and I didn't have enough to live on it. Solar would help, but in late fall the days were shorter and cloudy weeks were common. I needed something more stable, something designed to run for decades through storms and heat waves and the kind of normal chaos people used to call bad days. I needed the edges of the grid, the places where the utility companies turned the big power into usable power. I needed a substation. I packed like I was going to work a 12-hour shift and then sleep in my truck. Backpack, tool bag, small rolling tote. I took what would keep me alive and what would keep me thinking. A crowbar, a full-size flashlight with spare batteries, 2 headlamps, a handheld radio that could scan multiple bands, a first aid kit that didn't look like a glove compartment joke, work gloves, a hard hat because old habits don't die and because a hard hat is a weapon and a signal all at once, safety glasses, a respirator mask, the kind used for dust, not for miracles. I brought my multimeter and a non-contact voltage detector, because if you survive long enough, you start respecting the small, invisible things that can ruin you. I brought a pair of bolt cutters, medium size, not the kind that slice through everything, but enough to handle cheap padlocks and light chain. I brought a small coil of rope, a roll of duct tape, a few glow sticks, and a roll of reflective marking tape I used at work to label conduit and equipment. For protection, I had a legal handgun I kept locked away before all this happened, and a hunting rifle I'd inherited from my uncle. I didn't feel brave holding them. I felt responsible. I also felt the ugly truth that responsibility didn't guarantee anything. I left my row house at 6:10 a.m., when the sky was pale and the cold sat on everything like a hand. I walked instead of driving. Cars were obstacles now. Cars were traps. Cars were loud. I moved through back streets and alleys, avoiding the main roads, listening for anything that sounded like too many feet moving without purpose. The infected were drawn to noise and motion, but they were also unpredictable. Sometimes you could pass a block away and they wouldn't react. Sometimes you could step on a piece of glass and it would be like ringing a dinner bell. By mid-morning, I reached the industrial strip near the edge of Tinicum Township, not far from the runways of Philadelphia International Airport. The airport had its own story by then, rumors layered on rumors. People said the terminals had become a camp. People said the runways were blocked with abandoned planes. People said the guard had taken it. People said nobody held anything anymore. What I knew was simpler. Utilities clustered near industrial zones, and substations liked flat ground and access roads. I'd spent years driving past these places without really seeing them. Now I looked for them like they were water in a desert. There's a particular look to a distribution substation. The perimeter fence is usually chain link topped with angled extensions. The signs are always there: danger, high voltage, no trespassing, and a utility company name. Inside, the ground is usually covered in crushed stone or gravel, not dirt. Gravel helps with drainage, reduces vegetation, and provides some protection by keeping you from standing in mud during faults. There's usually a small control house or cabinet cluster, and behind it, the equipment. Steel structures, ceramic or polymer insulators, buswork, switches, and the big gray transformer sitting like a squat beast in the center, with thick cooling fins and a tank designed to last longer than most marriages. I found one behind a line of trees and a low berm, just off a service road that paralleled a set of freight tracks. It wasn't labeled on any sign I could see from a distance, which made it better. It was surrounded on 3 sides by brush, and on the 4th by a narrow strip of cracked asphalt leading to a gate. The gate was closed. The padlock looked new. That was my first warning. Utility yards don't usually upgrade padlocks in the middle of the week unless someone told them to. I stayed low and watched for 10 minutes. The hum was faint, but present. The deep, steady vibration you can feel more than hear when everything is energized. That meant at least some of the equipment inside was still live. Either the grid was limping, or the substation was being fed by another source, or the automatic switching schemes upstream were still working. It also meant the place could kill me without any infected involvement at all. I circled the fence slowly, careful to keep my silhouette broken by brush. I didn't touch the chain link. People think the fence itself is energized. It usually isn't. The danger is what's behind it and sometimes what's buried around it. Substations have grounding systems. Copper conductors and rods buried in a grid under the gravel, bonded to structures and fences to keep everything at the same electrical potential during faults. It's designed so if something goes wrong, you don't get lethal voltage differences between your feet and your hands. It's not designed to make the place safe for trespassing. It's designed to keep trained workers alive while everything is trying to go wrong. At the back corner, half hidden by a stand of scrubby trees, I found a section of fence where the bottom had been pushed up. Not cut. Pushed and bent like something had forced itself under it. The gravel inside was disturbed there, darker where the soil beneath had mixed. And there were marks on the metal. Not claw marks, not animal gnawing. Tool marks. Repeated prying, the metal bowed in a way that told me someone had tried to widen the gap without drawing attention from the road. I crouched and leaned in, close enough to smell the place. Substations smell faintly like warm metal and ozone on damp days. This one smelled like that, but underneath was something else. Stale sweat, old food, the sour edge of fear. Someone had been here recently. I waited again, longer. No movement inside, no voices, no footsteps, no utility trucks. The choice was simple, and not simple at all. If I left, I'd keep searching, burning daylight, risking infected contact and maybe finding nothing better. If I went in, I might find exactly what I needed. Or I might find out why someone had tried to break in from the back. I slid my pack off, fed it through first, then flattened myself and wriggled under the bent fence section. The gravel bit into my elbows and chest. The chain link scraped my jacket. My non-contact voltage detector stayed clipped to my pocket like a talisman. Inside, the world became a different kind of quiet. The hum was clearer now. The equipment stood in rigid rows, all angles and insulators and thick cables. Warning signs were bolted to almost everything. The ground was uneven with gravel, and my boots crunched softly. I moved like I was in a museum with alarms. The control house, a small concrete block building about the size of a large shed, sat near the front gate. The door was steel. There was a keypad lock, the kind utilities use to control access. There was also a second padlock and a heavy chain looped through the handle. That was my second warning. If the keypad was already there, the padlock was an extra layer, something added. I checked the windows. Small, reinforced glass, dirty from years of weather. Inside, it was dark. On the wall next to the door, a clipboard bracket hung empty. No logs. Utility crews love logs. They log everything. They log switching operations, inspections, oil samples, wildlife sightings, intrusions, vandalism. They log things that matter and things that don't. Because the one time the don't becomes a does, someone wants the paper trail. An empty bracket in a live yard felt wrong. I walked toward the main transformer, keeping distance from the steel structures. The transformer was a medium-sized unit, probably in the 10 to 20 megavolt ampere range, big enough to feed a neighborhood, not a city. There were bushings on top, large insulated terminals where the high-voltage and low-voltage connections were made. There were cooling radiators on the sides. The paint was scuffed but intact. Near the base, I saw something else. A wide, dark stain on the gravel, like something had spilled and soaked into the stones. I crouched, careful not to touch anything metal, and looked closer. The stain was old. The gravel was caked and clumped. Someone had tried to cover it with fresh gravel, but not well. The fresh stones were a slightly different color and size. In my old life, I would have called that in and kept walking until the safety guy cleared the area. In this life, it meant two things. A failure had happened here, and someone had tried to make it look like it hadn't. I stood and scanned the yard. No bodies. No obvious signs of a fight. But near the control house, I saw a storm drain grate inside the fence line. An opening that led to whatever drainage system ran under the yard. Around it, the gravel was disturbed, and there were drag marks, like something heavy had been moved across the stones. I followed the drag marks to the far side of the control house, where a metal cabinet stood open. Inside were wiring terminals, relay panels, and communication equipment. The cabinet door had a lock, but it had been forced. And then I saw the tape. Bright red tagging tape, the kind used in lockout procedures. Only this wasn't normal. In a proper lockout, you place a lock and a tag with a name, date, and reason. Here, the tape was wrapped around the cabinet handle like someone had tried to mimic a warning without actually following the process. The tape had writing on it in black marker. 3 words, all caps. Do not close. Close what? A breaker, a switch, a recloser. Something that had been left open for a reason. I swallowed and looked at the yard again, but with different eyes. A distribution substation has incoming feeders, lines that bring in medium voltage power, often around 12 kilovolts or higher depending on the region. It has breakers or switches that can isolate sections. It has outgoing feeders that send power back out. And it has protective relays, devices that watch current and voltage and detect faults, then trip breakers to clear those faults. If someone wrote "do not close," it meant that there had been a condition where energizing something caused danger. In a normal world, that might mean a faulted cable, a damaged transformer, or workers on a line. In this world, it could mean anything. I backed away from the cabinet and moved toward the control house again. If I could get inside, I might find a one-line diagram, an electrical schematic that shows how the substation is arranged. I might find switching orders, maintenance logs, relay settings, radio channels. I might find a clue about what happened here before the outbreak made everything worse. Or I might find the reason someone added a padlock. I didn't cut the padlock right away. I didn't want the sound. Bolt cutters make a sharp metallic crack when they bite through hardened steel, and sound carried in a quiet world. Instead, I tested the chain. It was heavy gauge, too thick for my cutters. The padlock was a high-security type, shrouded shackles, the kind designed to resist bolt cutters. It wasn't something you buy at a convenience store. My options narrowed. I moved to the side of the control house and checked the back. No other doors. I checked the roof line. Too high and no ladder. That meant I wasn't getting in without making noise or spending time. Time was the one thing I couldn't replace. So I pivoted. If I couldn't get the information, I could still use the yard. The fence alone was worth more than most buildings. Chain link topped with angled extensions, a locked gate, and a clear line of sight inside. The gravel meant fewer hidden things. The equipment inside, dangerous as it was, might act as a barrier. And if the substation was still energized, that meant there was still a chance of scavenging power responsibly, charging batteries from low-voltage sources, using existing lighting circuits, maybe accessing a service panel if there was one. But I wasn't going to do anything stupid. I'd seen what electricity did to people who got careless. I'd seen arc flash incidents. When a fault turns air into plasma and blasts heat like a small sun, you don't walk it off. You don't get lucky. You either respect it or it teaches you. I found a corner of the yard away from the main transformer where the gravel was clean and the fence line had less brush. I set my pack down and took a slow breath, scanning the outside of the fence for movement. Nothing. The hum continued. Somewhere beyond the trees, a distant metallic clatter echoed. Maybe a loose sign, maybe something else. I waited until it faded. Then I started making my new home. First, I secured that bent fence section from inside. I couldn't weld. I couldn't replace it, but I could make it harder to use. I took my rope and wove it through the chain link in a crisscross, tightening it like a crude stitch. Then I threaded duct tape over the rope to reduce noise if someone tried to push through. It wasn't strong, but it was a delay. Delays mattered. Second, I checked the rest of the fence for other weak points. 2 spots had signs of tampering. Someone had tried to cut the wire and failed, leaving frayed ends. Another corner had a section where the bottom was loose from the posts, as if a vehicle had brushed it. Whoever had been here was either desperate or persistent. Third, I made myself a place to sleep. The control house had a small concrete overhang near the door, not enough for shelter from a storm, but enough to break wind. I pulled a tarp from my pack and rigged it between the fence and the building, low and tight. The tarp was a dull color, not bright. I used the reflective tape sparingly, marking the edges of the tarp inside so I wouldn't trip at night. Outside, nothing obvious. Fourth, I laid out my rules. No touching metal structures unless I had to, and never with both hands. Keep distance from energized equipment. Use one hand when possible. Don't lean on the fence while standing on gravel. Grounding grids can make the fence safer, but safer doesn't mean safe when you don't know the condition. And most important, do not do switching. Do not close anything. Do not open anything. I wasn't going to play utility operator in the apocalypse. By late afternoon, I'd eaten a protein bar and a packet of peanut butter, and my stomach still felt hollow. I rationed water. I watched the sky darken. I listened to the world outside the fence. At 7:42 p.m., I saw movement in the trees. Not the infected, too controlled, too deliberate. A silhouette, low and cautious, moving along the berm. Someone else had found this place, or already knew it. My heart hammered, not with fear of a fight, but with the cold realization that I wasn't alone in my clever idea. I crouched behind the control house corner and waited. I kept my flashlight off. I kept my breathing slow. The sound of my pulse felt loud enough to give me away. The figure approached the front gate. A hand reached through the chain link, felt for the padlock, tested it. Then the figure stepped back and tilted their head like they were listening. I watched through a crack in my tarp. The person was average height, bundled in a jacket, face shadowed by a hood. They carried something long, maybe a tool, maybe a weapon. They moved like they were used to being careful. They walked along the fence, checking corners. When they reached the back, they paused at the bent section where I'd stitched it. The figure knelt, touched the rope, and froze. I saw their head turn, slow and sharp, like a dog catching a scent. They knew someone was inside. I weighed my options in a handful of seconds. Stay hidden and hope they leave. Confront and risk escalation. Make noise and draw the wrong attention. I chose the least dangerous path, which in this world still wasn't safe. I stepped out from behind the control house, hands visible, flashlight in one hand pointed at the ground. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm not looking for trouble." The figure stood, still and tense. Then they raised a hand, palm out, the universal sign to stop. "Don't come closer," a woman's voice called back. Clear, controlled, not panicked. "Stay where you are." "I will," I said. This is the only place I found that wasn't crawling with infected. There was a pause. Then, "You're inside the yard." "Yes." "Alone?" "For now." She shifted her weight. In the fading light, I saw the long object she carried was a fiberglass hot stick, an insulated pole utility workers used to operate switches from a distance. That was not something random people carried. That was not something you found in a kitchen drawer. "You work for the utility?" I asked. "Used to," she said. "Contractor, substation maintenance and testing." It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the weather. I'd guessed this place had a story. Now the story was walking up to the fence holding the tools that belonged inside. "My name's Caleb," I said. She hesitated, then said, "Marisol." "Marisol," I repeated. "If you're here, you know what's going on with this yard." Her shoulders tightened. "I know enough to tell you to leave." "I can't just," I started, then stopped myself. A better question came. "Why does everyone avoid it?" She let out a short breath that sounded like a laugh without humor. "Because it's a trap. It was a trap before any of this." I glanced toward the cabinet with the red tape. "That's why it says, 'Do not close.'" Her hood turned toward it. "You read that?" "I saw it." Marisol stepped closer to the fence, still keeping distance. "Listen to me carefully. This yard is not like it looks. The hum you hear is not comfort. It's a warning." I fought the urge to argue. I kept my voice calm. "Then tell me what happened." She was silent long enough that I thought she might leave. Then she said, 3 weeks before the outbreak, the substation started tripping. Not once, not twice. Over and over. Protective relays were seeing faults that didn't make sense. Crews would go out, inspect, find nothing. They'd reset. It would trip again. That sounded like a damaged underground cable, a failing insulator, or an intermittent wildlife fault. The kind of problem that turns grown engineers into coffee addicts. Marisol continued. They pulled logs. They checked relay settings. They checked the incoming feeder. They did infrared scans for hotspots. They did partial discharge testing on the transformer bushings. She spoke like someone who'd lived in those reports. Nothing conclusive, but then we started seeing physical signs. Cabinets open, locks cut, not stolen, just opened, like someone wanted access, not parts. My eyes flicked to the forced cabinet. Someone was trying to do switching. Or trying to trip it, she said. Either way, it escalated. One night, the yard tripped and stayed down. A crew responded. 2 guys went in to do checks. I waited, feeling the gravel under my boots like a reminder to stand still. Marisol's voice lowered. Only one came out. A hard silence settled between us. In my head, I filled it with the words I didn't want to use. I didn't need the details. The absence was enough. They said it was an arc flash, she continued. They said it was a mistake. Human error. Wrong assumption. Wrong switch. That's what the report said. But the report had holes. Missing pages. Relay event logs overwritten. The one-line diagram in the control house replaced with a newer print that didn't match the equipment. I looked at the control house door again, feeling the extra padlock in my bones. Marisol tapped the hot stick lightly against the fence, metal clinking. After that, they put that second lock on. They told contractors and non-essential staff to stay away. They told security to make extra rounds. And then the outbreak hit, I said. And then the outbreak hit, she echoed, and the crews stopped coming, and the switching center started doing remote operations from wherever they were hiding, trying to keep sections energized. But this yard didn't behave. I forced myself to ask the uncomfortable question. What do you mean? She took a breath. Do you know what backfeed is? Yes, I said. When a generator feeds power back into lines that are supposed to be dead, it's why you never assume a line is de-energized. You test, you ground, you lock out. Good, she said. Now imagine a neighborhood full of people who bought generators and solar inverters. Imagine them trying to power their homes. Some of them do it right. Some of them do it wrong. The grid becomes a patchwork of little power islands. I nodded slowly. Marisol's voice sharpened. This yard started seeing that patchwork like a threat. The relays didn't just trip on faults anymore. They tripped on patterns, on timing, on sequences that looked like someone was intentionally pushing it toward instability. I swallowed. You're saying someone was manipulating it. I'm saying I stopped believing it was random, she said. And the worst part, the infected avoid this place. Not because they're smart, because the yard does things. What things? She stared through the fence at the equipment like it could answer for her. At night, the lights in the control house come on. My throat went dry. There aren't lights on in there. There's no power inside if the door's locked. There are emergency circuits, she said. There are battery backup systems, but I've seen it. A glow through the dirty windows, and then it goes dark again. I thought about the empty clipboard bracket, the missing logs, the forced cabinets, the drag marks near the storm drain. Marisol's voice dropped. And sometimes the yard trips. You hear the breaker open, sharp, loud, and then a minute later it closes again. No crew, no truck, just on, off, on. Remote operation maybe, automatic reclosing schemes. But in a world where communications were failing, why would that still happen? Unless someone was still watching. I forced a steady tone. You came here tonight to what? Check it? I came to make sure it stayed open, she said, to keep it from energizing something dangerous. Dangerous like what? She looked at me. Even in the dimness, I felt the weight of her stare. There's a cable vault under the gravel. It feeds a spur line that runs toward the airport perimeter and the river pump station. There's an old service tunnel nearby, stormwater. People can move through it. I stared at the storm drain grate. The drag marks. Yes, she said. Someone has been using it. Before the outbreak, during. I followed signs. I found footprints fresh inside the yard. I found food wrappers in the vault. A cold realization slid into place. Someone was living under it. Or moving under it, she said. And they didn't want anyone else here. I felt my mouth go dry. So the substation was their cover. Marisol nodded once. And if you stay, you're going to find out why they were willing to risk this place. I should have listened then. I should have packed and moved before night fully settled, before the trees turned into one black wall and the sounds outside became harder to interpret. But I had already staked a claim in my head. Fence, gravel, a place with a locked gate. The idea of it felt like safety, and safety is a powerful drug. I can't leave tonight, I said. Not in the dark, not with the infected out there. Marisol's jaw tightened. Then at least don't touch anything. Don't try to get into the control house, don't operate switches. Don't go into the vault. I wasn't planning to. She lifted the hot stick slightly. And if you hear the breaker operate, if you hear that sharp crack and the hum changes, get away from the equipment. Get to the fence line and crouch. Keep one hand in your pocket if you can. I frowned. One hand in my pocket? To keep you from touching something with both hands, she said, like explaining it to a trainee. It's a stupid trick that saves lives. She stepped back from the fence. I'm not coming in. I'm not sleeping here. I've got a place. If you survive the night, leave at first light. Wait, I said. Where are you going? Marisol paused, then said, south, along the river. There's a maintenance yard with a diesel tank and a concrete building. I'm not alone. That sentence carried a lot. Company, shelter, maybe a community, or maybe a trap of a different kind. She turned to go, then looked back once. Caleb? Yeah? If you see the lights in the control house, she said, don't assume it's help. Then she vanished into the trees as quietly as she'd come. I stood in the gravel, the hum in my bones, and tried to convince myself that I hadn't just made a mistake that this would be impossible to undo. Night settled in layers. The temperature dropped, the air turned sharp. Far off, I heard a burst of sound, something like distant shouting, then silence. Somewhere closer, something scraped against metal, slow and persistent. I checked my tarp, tightened a knot, and sat with my back against the control house wall. I kept my flashlight in my lap, off. I kept my rifle within reach, but I didn't point it at anything. Pointing a weapon at shadows is how you make bad decisions. At 11:18 p.m., the hum changed. It wasn't dramatic, it didn't cut out, it shifted, like the note of a machine winding down or winding up, a subtle change in frequency that made the hair on my arms lift. Then came the sound Marisol had warned about. A sharp crack, like a heavy breaker opening. A brief silence, as if the yard held its breath. And then the hum came back, slightly different again, followed by a second crack, softer, like a contact closing. My mouth went dry. Somewhere in the darkness, behind the trees, the infected reacted to the sound. I heard a chorus of distant moans and shuffling. Not close, but closer than I wanted. I moved, as Marisol told me. I stood, keeping my hands away from metal and backed toward the fence line. I crouched near the corner, away from the transformer, away from the bus structures, away from anything tall and conductive. I tucked my left hand into my jacket pocket like a child trying to keep warm. And I waited. That's when the control house windows glowed. Not bright, not like a light turned on full. More like a dim greenish-white wash that filled the dirty glass from within, steady and unnatural. It wasn't the warm yellow of a lamp. It looked like instrument light, like a panel display or emergency lighting. The glow lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then it blinked twice, as if someone inside was testing a switch. Then it went dark. I sat frozen, breath shallow. My mind ran through possibilities like a checklist. Battery backup lighting? Possible, but why now, exactly when the breaker operated? A flashlight inside? But the glow was too even, too diffuse. A screen, a computer monitor, a relay panel display? Those do glow. But the control house door was locked with a chain and high-security padlock, and Marisol said the keypad was there too. That meant someone would need codes or tools. Or they'd need another way in. My eyes drifted to the storm drain grate. I didn't move toward it. I didn't even shift my weight. I just stared at it, feeling like the yard itself was watching me back. At 1:03 a.m., I heard it, metal moving under gravel. Not the loud crunch of boots on stone. Something deeper, a faint scraping, like a cover being shifted. Then a soft thud. I kept my flashlight off and watched. The storm drain grate didn't move, but the gravel around it looked different in the low moonlight, like it had been disturbed again. Then, very slowly, a shadow rose near the base of the control house, in the narrow gap between the wall and a row of cabinets. A person. Not stumbling, not jerking, not reacting to sound like the infected. This person moved with care, testing each step. They wore dark clothing and a hood. Their face was hidden. They carried a small bag. They stopped, looked toward the transformer, then toward the fence line where I crouched, their head tilted slightly as if listening. I held my breath. The person turned away from me and moved toward the forced cabinet with the red tape. They crouched and opened the cabinet wider, shining a very dim light inside, shielded, directed. They reached in and did something quick, like flipping a small switch or connecting a clip. Then the hum shifted again. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clenched my left hand in my pocket until my knuckles hurt. The person closed the cabinet and moved toward the control house door. They didn't touch the padlock. They crouched near the base of the wall and reached into the gravel, fingers moving fast. They lifted something small, maybe a key, maybe a tool, maybe a connector. Then the control house windows glowed again, faint and steady. The person stood, watching the windows like a scientist watching a reaction. And in that moment, I understood something Marisol had tried to hand me without saying it outright. This place wasn't abandoned by accident. It was being used. I didn't know by whom or why, but the yard was still part of someone's plan. I could have shouted. I could have raised my flashlight and called them out. I could have fired into the air and tried to scare them off. But sound was currency now, and spending it carelessly got you bankrupt fast. So I did what I did at work when I saw a problem I didn't understand. I observed. The person moved back toward the storm drain grate. They didn't touch it. Instead, they went to a spot a few feet away where the gravel looked slightly darker. They knelt, brushed stones aside, and found a metal handle flush with the ground, a hidden hatch camouflaged by gravel. A cable vault access. They lifted it just enough to slip fingers under, then raised it slowly, controlled, making almost no sound. The black hole beneath exhaled a damp, cold breath that carried the smell of stagnant water and rust. The person glanced once toward the fence line again, toward me, then vanished down into the vault, pulling the hatch closed behind them until it lay flat under the gravel again. The control house glow faded a few seconds later. I stayed crouched for a full minute after they disappeared, listening. Nothing. Then, faintly, from below, a metallic click, followed by a soft buzzing sound that made my teeth itch. A relay? A contactor? A small inverter? Something electrical being energized in the dark under the yard. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. I wanted to crawl into my tarp shelter and close my eyes and wake up to daylight like the world could reset. But my mind wouldn't let me. If someone could access the vault, they could access cables. They could access control wiring. They could manipulate the yard in ways that could be lethal without ever stepping into the open. And if they were doing it now, at 1 o'clock in the morning, it wasn't for routine maintenance. It was for secrecy. I backed slowly toward my tarp, still keeping distance from metal, and sat again with my back to the wall. I kept my eyes on the control house windows. At 3:26 a.m., the yard operated again. Crack, hum shift, crack. This time, the control house stayed dark. At 4:12 a.m., I heard the faint scraping under gravel again, then silence. By 6:05 a.m., the sky began to lighten, and the trees turned from black wall to gray outlines. I didn't sleep. I watched the fence line until my eyes burned. When the sun finally edged up, pale and weak, I stood and stretched muscles that felt like wires pulled too tight. I drank a careful amount of water and ate another bar without tasting it. Then, I did the thing I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I went to the cable vault hatch, not to open it, not to climb in, just to confirm it existed. In daylight, it was easier to see the subtle differences in gravel color, the faint rectangular outline where stones didn't settle the same. I crouched and brushed a thin layer of gravel aside with the back of my glove. There it was, a metal access cover with a recessed handle. No label, no stamped utility name. That was unusual. Most vault covers are marked, even if the marking is old. This one looked replaced. Newer metal, less pitted, like someone had swapped it in. My stomach tightened. I stood and walked to the forced cabinet again. The red tape was still there. The words still stared at me. Do not close. Inside the cabinet, I looked without touching. There were terminal blocks and wiring, neatly organized, but there was also something that didn't belong. A small black device attached with zip ties, tucked behind a relay panel. A battery pack, maybe, or a communication module. It had a thin antenna wire that ran downward through a conduit knockout that should have been sealed. Someone had modified the cabinet to feed something into the vault. I stepped back, the puzzle pieces sliding into a picture I didn't like. Marisol had told me to leave at first light. I should have. But another thing I'd learned in my old life was this: if someone is using a system, they will come back to it. And if I wanted answers, or leverage, or even just to survive, I needed to understand what kind of game I'd wandered into. I took a slow walk around the yard again, this time looking for things I'd missed. Near the back fence, behind a row of steel structures, I found a small pile of trash hidden under a piece of plywood. Food wrappers, a half-empty bottle of electrolyte drink, a folded paper towel with dark grime on it. Evidence of someone being careful but not perfect. Under the plywood was something else. A notebook, not a utility logbook. A personal spiral notebook, the kind you buy in a pack. The cover was smeared with dirt. The pages inside were written in tight handwriting. I flipped it open cautiously, keeping my hands away from any metal nearby. The first pages were lists, times, numbers, notes. Feeder a stable, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Backfeed spike 118. Remote close attempt 326. Do not close, vault, load present. The handwriting was not Marisol's. I didn't know whose it was, but whoever wrote it understood the yard. They tracked operations like a watcher tracks tides. Then, on a page near the middle, a sentence made my throat tighten. People avoid this yard because they think it's cursed. Good, let them. Below that, a rough map. The map showed the substation yard, the vault, and a line drawn toward the river pump station, then toward the airport perimeter. There were markings like access point, staging, quiet corridor. This wasn't just someone hiding. This was someone moving. I heard the sound then, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps outside the fence on the service road. Not shuffling, not dragging. Footsteps with rhythm. Someone was coming back. I snapped the notebook shut and slid it into my pack. I didn't like stealing, even now, but that notebook was a key, and keys mattered more than manners. I moved to the corner near the bent fence section where I had a line of sight through the brush. A figure approached the gate. Not Marisol. This person wore a jacket with the reflective striping, like utility clothing. Their hood was up, their face was hidden by a cloth mask. They carried a backpack and a long tool bag. They stopped at the gate and did something that made my stomach drop. They entered a code on the keypad. The gate lock clicked. They didn't open it, not yet. They paused, listening. Then they reached up and touched the extra padlock on the control house chain, as if checking it. They were methodical, comfortable. They belonged here. I raised my voice just enough to carry, not enough to echo. "Hey," I called, "don't come in." The figure froze. Slowly, they turned their head toward me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the person spoke, voice muffled by the mask. "You're in the yard." "Yes," I said, "and I saw you last night." A long pause, then, "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same," I replied. The figure took one step back from the gate, hands visible. "This is a live electrical facility. It's dangerous." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm being careful. And that's why I'm asking you what you're doing." The figure's head tilted slightly, like they were reassessing me. "You understand substations?" "I'm an industrial electrician," I said. "I don't do high-voltage switching, but I know enough not to touch things I don't understand." That seemed to matter. The figure's posture eased a fraction. "Name," they said. "Caleb." Another pause. "You can call me Dean." I didn't believe that was his real name, but names were currency too, and he wasn't spending his. "What do you want?" Dean asked. "I want to survive," I said. "And I want to understand why this yard was a problem before the outbreak." Dean looked at the control house windows, then at the equipment, then back to me. His gaze settled on the spot where I'd found the notebook pile, and his shoulders tightened slightly, like he knew exactly what had been there. "You've been poking around," he said. "I've been looking," I admitted. Dean's voice hardened. "This yard keeps people alive. If you mess with it, you could shut off power to a lot of places that still need it." "Power to what? A neighborhood? A pump station? Something else?" "You're maintaining the grid," I said, disbelief creeping in. Dean's shoulders rose and fell once. "Parts of it, enough." "In the middle of all this?" "In the middle of all this," he echoed. "The infected don't understand electricity. They don't climb fences well. They avoid the hum. This is a safe node, a place to route power for things that matter." I thought of Marisol's warning. Then why the missing logs? Why the modified cabinet? Why the vault access? Dean's silence was answer enough. "You're not just routing power," I said. "You're using the yard for something underground." Dean took a slow step along the outside of the fence, staying parallel to me. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I saw you go into the vault," I said. "I saw the control house glow." His head snapped toward me. For the first time, I felt real danger from him. Not physical, not immediate, but the danger of someone whose secret had been touched. Dean's voice dropped. "If you saw that, you should have left." "Marisol said the same thing," I said, watching his reaction closely. That name hit him like a thrown stone. He went still. "Marisol was here," Dean said. "Yes," I replied. "She warned me. She said this place was a trap." Dean stared through the fence at the gravel, jaw tight under the mask. "Marisol doesn't understand the whole picture." "Then explain it," I said. He hesitated, then looked past me toward the equipment, as if weighing the risk of words against the risk of silence. Finally, he said, "This yard was compromised before the outbreak. Somebody was using it to access critical infrastructure without being seen. They found a way into the vault. They found a way into the control systems. They were testing how to manipulate feeder operations." "Who?" I asked. Dean's eyes flicked up, scanning the tree line, Does it matter now? It matters if they're still alive, I said. And it matters if I'm standing on top of something that could get me killed. Dean exhaled slowly. Fine. Here's what you need to know, Caleb. You can stay here for 1 day. 1. You do not open the control house. You do not open the vault. You do not touch the cabinets. You use this fence as shelter, then you leave. And if I don't? I asked. Dean's gaze sharpened. Then you'll learn why people avoided this place even before the world ended. He turned away from the gate and started walking back down the service road fast and controlled. Wait, I called. Dean. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He disappeared into the trees, leaving the gate locked and unopened, as if he'd come only to warn me. Or to confirm I was a problem. I stood in the gravel yard, the hum steady, and realized something else. Dean had entered a keypad code easily, which meant power still fed the access systems, at least intermittently. Which meant the yard had a functioning low-voltage panel somewhere, likely in the control house, but possibly in an external service pedestal. If I could find a safe, legitimate low-voltage outlet, something like a 120-volt convenience receptacle used for maintenance, I could charge my batteries without touching the high-voltage side at all. I could take a little from the system without breaking it. That was my rationalization. And rationalizations are the first step toward mistakes. I searched along the exterior wall of the control house and found a small weatherproof box mounted near the base, locked with a tiny padlock. A maintenance outlet box. Utilities use them for heat guns, trouble lights, laptop chargers, relay test sets. I tested the box with my non-contact voltage detector without touching metal. It chirped faintly. Live. My heart kicked. I could cut the tiny padlock with my cutters. It would make noise, but less than the big lock, or I could pry it. Then I paused. Marisol's voice echoed in my head. Don't assume it's help. Dean's warning, 1 day. The truth settled in. If they wanted me gone, they might have set this up as bait. An electrified box, a fault condition, a rigged ground, anything. Electricity is honest, but people aren't. So, instead of cutting it, I did something slower and safer. I used my multimeter with insulated probes, keeping one hand in my pocket, to test for voltage at the box's exterior screws through the tiny gaps. I didn't open it. I just confirmed the metal surface wasn't energized relative to the gravel. The meter read essentially nothing. That was encouraging, but not proof. Then I walked away. I decided I would leave. Not because I was scared, though I was. Not because I didn't want power, though I did. But because the yard had a story that wasn't mine. And stepping deeper into it felt like stepping onto a live bus bar with wet gloves. I packed at 9:40 a.m., folding my tarp quickly. I left the stitched rope on the fence, a small scar. I tightened my pack straps and moved toward the bent section to crawl out. That's when the infected arrived. Not a horde, not a movie wave, just a handful, maybe 6 or 7, drawn by something. Maybe the breaker noise from the night, maybe my movement, maybe Dean's earlier approach. They drifted out of the brush like slow smoke, heads turning, bodies moving with that broken, hungry curiosity. They reached the fence and pressed against it, fingers curling through the chain link. Their faces were slack, eyes unfocused. Their clothes were dirty and torn like they'd been outside for days. The fence held. They pawed at it, leaned into it, and made soft noises that turned my stomach. Not words, not screams. Just the sound of throats trying to remember what language used to be. I backed away, keeping distance. I didn't raise my rifle. I didn't want sound. I didn't want to escalate. Then one of them moved toward the back corner. the one I'd stitched. It lowered itself, as if remembering how to crawl, and pressed its shoulder under the bent section. The rope held for a second. Then it snapped. The duct tape tore. The gap widened. My stomach dropped. I should have reinforced it better. I should have used wire. I should have no time. I sprinted, not toward the control house, not toward the equipment, but toward the far side of the yard where the fence was strongest and the infected were not yet gathered. I moved with my left hand clenched in my pocket, right hand free, because even now, even in panic, I wasn't going to grab a steel structure and let the yard finish me. The infected pushed under the bent fence section, one after another, bodies scraping gravel, movements jerky but determined. They rose inside the yard, heads snapping toward me. My mind ran through escape routes. The front gate was locked. The fence was high and topped with angled extensions. The equipment was a maze of metal and danger. Then I saw the storm drain grate and the hidden vault hatch outline. A cold thought hit me. If Dean was right, if this yard was a node, a corridor, a secret, then the vault was a way out. And if the vault was a way out, then it was also a way in. The infected were already inside. The yard wasn't a fortress. It was a funnel. I ran toward the vault hatch, not because I wanted to go underground, but because I had seconds left to choose between known danger and unknown danger. The infected closed the distance, their feet crunching gravel, their arms reaching. I dropped to my knees at the hatch outline and brushed gravel aside with frantic hands. The recessed handle appeared. I hooked my fingers under it and pulled. The hatch didn't budge. It was latched from below. Of course it was. Dean and whoever else used this place weren't going to leave their underground access open to anyone who wandered in. I jerked harder, nothing. The infected were close enough now that I could smell them. Stale sweat, damp cloth, something sour and wrong. I looked around wildly. The forced cabinet, the modified device, the conduit leading down. If I couldn't open the vault, maybe I could force the control house door, or climb the fence. But climbing the fence meant hands on metal, feet on gravel, body exposed on the top line, and infected grabbing from below. It meant getting tangled. It meant falling. Then, from beneath the gravel, I heard a metallic click. The hatch lifted a fraction of an inch, as if someone below had released the latch. The handle rose into my fingers like an offered hand. I froze, heart hammering. Someone was under there. Someone had been listening. And they had just decided, at the worst possible moment, to open the door. The hatch lifted another inch. A voice rose from below, muffled but urgent. Down. Now. It wasn't Dean. The tone was different. Younger. Strained. I had a single breath to decide whether I trusted a voice from the dark more than I trusted the infected in the open. Electricity is honest. People aren't. But the infected were honest too, in their own terrible way. They would do what they did without negotiation. So I grabbed the hatch handle, yanked it up, and dropped into the vault. Cold, damp air swallowed me. My boots hit a metal rung ladder. My shoulders slammed the side wall. The smell of wet concrete and rust filled my nose. Above, the infected crowded the opening, arms reaching down, fingers scraping air. The hatch slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud. Darkness. A beam of dim light flicked on, shielded, pointed down the tunnel, not up at the hatch. A person stood a few feet away, holding the light. They wore a utility jacket like Dean's, but smaller, slimmer. A cloth mask covered their face. Their eyes were wide and alert. Move, they hissed. We don't have long. I didn't ask their name. I didn't ask why. I followed because the tunnel ahead was the only direction left. We moved through the vault like rats in a storm drain, boots splashing shallow water, hands sliding along concrete walls. The tunnel wasn't a big human-friendly corridor. It was a cable vault and stormwater channel hybrid, a place designed for wires and runoff, not survival. Thick cables ran along one side in trays, insulated and bundled, disappearing into the dark. The person led me to a junction where a ladder went up toward a round manhole cover. They stopped, listening. Above us, faintly, the hum of the substation still resonated through the concrete like a heartbeat. The person looked at me, eyes hard. "You shouldn't have gone in there." "I know," I whispered. They nodded once, like that was enough. "Dean told you to leave, didn't he?" My stomach tightened. "Yes, and you didn't." "I tried," I said. "Then the infected got in." The person cursed softly under their breath. "That vent section. We told him to fix it months ago. He said it wasn't a priority." Months ago. The words hit me like ice. "You've been using this place for months," I said. The person's eyes flicked away. "Longer than that." I stared at the damp concrete, at the cable trays, at the careful way the conduits were routed, at the fact that someone had access to all of this and the world above had no idea. "What is this?" I asked. The person hesitated, then said, "It's a corridor, power and passage. It kept people alive when everything was normal, and it keeps people alive now." "For who?" I asked. Their gaze snapped back to me. "For the ones who know where the doors are." They climbed the ladder and pressed an ear to the manhole cover, listening for movement. After a moment, they signaled me up. We pushed together. The cover shifted with a grinding sound, heavy but possible. A sliver of daylight appeared. Cold air rushed in. We lifted the cover just enough to slip out. We emerged behind a row of industrial buildings near the river pump station, in a patch of weeds and broken asphalt. The manhole cover settled back into place with a dull thud. The person grabbed my sleeve and pulled me behind a concrete barrier. "Listen," they whispered. "You saw too much. Dean's going to want you gone. Marisol's going to want you gone. And if you go back to your old neighborhood, you'll bring attention with you." "I didn't ask for this," I said. "No one did," they replied. They stared at me for a long moment, then made a decision. "There's a rule," they said. "If you find a door, you either forget it, or you join the people who guard it." My throat tightened. "And if I don't want either?" The person's eyes narrowed. "Then you're going to die, Caleb. Maybe today, maybe next week. But you won't die old." A sound rose in the distance. An engine, far off. Maybe a truck. Maybe a generator running somewhere. The world still had pockets of motion. The person kept their voice low. "We don't have time for debate. Dean will check the vault. He'll know someone opened it. He'll follow." I thought of the notebook in my pack, the maps, the lines drawn toward the airport, the hidden infrastructure under a region that was collapsing above. "I'm not looking to take anything from you," I said. "I just wanted a fence and a place to charge batteries." The person's eyes softened a fraction, like they almost believed me. "You wanted power. That's how it starts." They leaned closer. The reason everyone avoided that substation wasn't superstition. It was because people who went in didn't come out the way they went in. Some of them didn't come out at all. And the ones who did, they started asking questions they weren't supposed to ask. I swallowed. "Like what?" "Like why relay logs were missing," the person said. "Like why certain feeders tripped at the same time every night. Like why the control house light came on when the switching center swore nobody touched it." They tapped my pack lightly, right where the notebook sat inside. Like why someone was building a private grid under the public one. My pulse hammered. "Who are you?" I asked. The person hesitated, then pulled their cloth mask down just enough to show their mouth and chin. Young, maybe mid-20s, face smudged with grime, eyes too serious. "Name's Eli," they said. "I used to be an apprentice. Dean pulled me in when the first incident happened, when the report got rewritten." "The arc flash," I murmured. Eli's jaw tightened. "Yeah. The story everyone accepted because it was easier than the truth." "And the truth is," I prompted. Eli looked toward the river, toward the industrial sprawl, toward the distant line of airport structures barely visible through haze. "The truth is," Eli said, "someone was preparing for this before anyone admitted it was coming. Maybe they didn't know it would be the infected. Maybe they just knew systems were fragile. But they started building doors and corridors and backup feeds and hidden switches. They started deciding who got power when the world went dark." He looked back at me. "And when the outbreak hit, those doors became the only way some people survived." I felt the weight of my own stubbornness settle into something heavier than regret. Eli's voice hardened again. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're coming with me. You're going to meet Marisol. You're going to meet Dean. You're going to hand over anything you took from that yard, and you're going to tell the truth about what you saw and what you did." "And if I refuse?" I asked. Eli's eyes didn't blink. "Then I leave you here with the infected and the empty buildings, and you can try to find another fortress." I looked at the sky, pale and cold, and felt the old world receding further behind me. I nodded once. "Okay." Eli exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. "Good. Stay close. Don't make noise. And if you see anyone moving weird, don't stare. Just keep walking." We moved along the cracked service roads behind the pump station, keeping to shadows, using buildings as cover. Eli walked with the confidence of someone who knew every fence gap and blind corner. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste movement either. As we walked, I kept thinking about that substation, how I'd seen it as a fortress, a battery, a solution, and how it had been something else entirely. A door, a test, a warning written in red tape. Do not close. I didn't know yet what would happen when I met Dean and Marisol again. I didn't know if they were building something worth joining or something worth escaping. I didn't know if Eli was saving me or recruiting me. But I did know one thing, as clearly as I'd ever known anything. When the world breaks, the people who control power control everything else. And I had just stepped into their shadows. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming.